Hello, everyone. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Melody Nest. Looking for a logo or design for your podcast, radio, band, or creative project? I know I was when I started the podcast, and working with a designer who knew what I was looking for made it easy and convenient. Melody Nest is an upcoming platform connecting producers of all kinds to freelance designers to help them create their branding. Check them out and use offer code TESHER to save 10% off your first order. Again, that is offer code TESHER. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the All Things Interesting podcast. My guest today is the founder and creator of the web browser-based image editor, Photopea. With over 3 million visitors, Photopea.com provides a similar functionality to programs such as Adobe Photoshop, GIMP, Paint.net, and Corel. What makes Photopea stand out is that it is the first of its kind to allow for native support of .Psd files or Photoshop files, and it has been translated into over 38 languages. On this episode, we discuss the history of the project, his experiences in developing it, and what is on the horizon. Without further ado, give a warm welcome to my guest, Ivan Kutskir. Welcome to the show, Ivan. How are you?
Hello, I'm great. How are you? Thank you for inviting me.
Doing well. It's good to have you on the show today. I've been kind of following your platform, Photopea, for a while now. In the past, I've kind of had some experience using photo editors, namely Photoshop and GIMP, but I came across your platform, Photopea, online while doing some design work for my podcast. And what kind of stood out about it is the name. Can we go over where the name Photopea came from?
Well, I wanted its Photopea to be a web app accessible on the web. So I wanted to get a domain which is easy to remember and short. And somehow it was very hard to find a nice domain which is free. So somehow I managed to find photopea.com, which was not owned by anybody. So I just decided to let it be Photopea.
Did you ever think to yourself that it wasn't going to be a marketable name? And kind of what I mean by that is, did you think people would be confused when they saw the name Photopea and think of it being something else than what it actually is?
I don't know. I really didn't think that much about the name. So yeah, but there is photo in the name, so I thought that maybe somebody may well maybe not immediately, but over time people will know that Photopea is photo editor.
hmm And I saw on the internet that you had a talk at a conference, and you mentioned that you had around 2.8 million users by May of 2019, I believe, or 2018.
19. Yeah, it was this spring.
And it's crazy because despite the name, you were able to have that many visitors not only come to your site, but use the platform consecutively in only a span of a couple of years. Did you imagine that happening, or was that kind of all coincidental?
Well, I knew that if is really good photo editor available for free, then many people will be using it. But I didn't plan to make Photopea what it is now. I had when I started, I had no idea how long will I continue working on it. So I did not plan like the whole several years. But yes, if you're asking if I'm surprised, actually, by if I consider the amount of work, then I think it's reasonable, because I think I made a quite useful tool.
So there's already a couple of competitors in that landscape, namely Photoshop, GIMP, Paint.net, and I'm sure there's others, but some of these cost quite a bit of money, such as Adobe Photoshop, but there's a discrepancy in what their features are. When I used your platform, it reminded me completely of Photoshop. And what made it special was that it was completely online, web based. Did you ever go into this questioning if the product would be successful in the sense that you're competing with the likes of Photoshop, who has a strong foothold on the market, or are you kind of just creating something that was easy to use and anybody could just jump onto and edit any of their photos?
Well, my main the main feature which I based all my work around was the support for PSD files, Photoshop files. So I wanted people to be able to open Photoshop files and save Photoshop files, and this file that you save from Photopea will be exactly the same what you as the one from Photoshop. So I wanted it to be the main attraction for people, the main feature, the support for Photoshop files. And I think that just because of that, it already requires a complex program. I already knew that it will not be something you could use with one finger on a phone, or so I already expected it to be a complex program because of the support for Photoshop files.
Is it complex to create that support for Photoshop? Because I found it interesting when I first used it. My logos and cover art for my podcast was created in Photopea. And it's funny because when I first saw it, you guys had support for PSD files, which is something I've never seen done before on other platforms of any sort. So is that something you would say is complex to make?
Yeah, I think it's quite complex. The description of the format itself is available on Adobe website. They published it for free. It's available to anybody, but it's actually quite complex to make a program which will do open PSD files. So yes, I would say it's quite complex, and maybe that's the reason why not so many programs support PSD files.
Now, not to get too technical about it, but what at a high level makes it complex to implement that?
There can be quite a lot of things stored in PSD files. There can be layers, there can be text layers, pixel layers, there can be like vector graphics, there can be folders of layers and smart objects, layer styles, layer effects. So there are many categories of data which can be stored in PSD file, and you have to make a program which reads all that data, which can process it somehow, and which can store it back into a file. And that's quite complex to extract all the data from PSD and save it back. I would say that that's quite complex, which maybe discourages many people from supporting PSD format.
I see. So it kind of sounds as though it's a competitive advantage for your platform to support natively PSD related files. Now, did you have any design experience going into this? Have you used Photoshop, Corel, or any other programs before creating Photopea, or was this kind of an offshoot project with no background experience in that area?
Yeah, well, earlier before I got into programming, before I started to study programming, I already as a kid I used to play around with Photoshop, with GIMP, so I knew these programs very well. And yeah, I think that was I wish there was maybe some free program for this.
Hmm.
So that's how I got into it. But I knew it from the user perspective, not I had no idea what's going inside the program. Like I didn't understand computers at all.
When I was a kid, I would be involved heavily in the gaming community when it came to developing mods for video games, and there was a whole assortment of programs to use that were paid but were overly expensive, and then there were replacement programs that were free. So if we looked at 3D modeling programs, there were options, namely Blender 3D, which everybody used. There was 3ds Max, there was Maya, And then again, when it came to photo editing, there was Photoshop, GIMP, Paint.net, and a lot of these open source programs could do almost the exact same thing as their paid counterparts. I mean, if we look at Photoshop, that program costs a lot of money on a subscription basis to use on a year. And if we get Blender 3D, then it's free, but it still provides a lot of the similar features that Photoshop has. Now, I kind of find that really cool that you were able to create a program like this that supports all of the features that Photoshop has when it comes to layers and things of that nature. Also supporting PSD files when there's a whole market for these photo editors already. So I find it pretty unique that you created this. Now, one thing that stood out though was that you created this on a $500 laptop
Yeah.
out of college. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Well, I bought my first laptop when I was 17, and I replace it like every 2 years. And I always I didn't have much money as a student, so I bought like regular simple laptops. And somehow and that's the machine which I used to all my work. So like things for the university, or my hobby, or browsing internet, I did it all on my one laptop. And that's how I made Photopea. You don't really need a very powerful machine for programming. Well, it depends what you're making. If you're making some complex games with complex graphics, then you probably need a good graphics card. But if you have a bad computer, then it's gonna be slower, but it will still work.
So here's my question. Growing up, like I said, I would be developing mods for video games, and I would use programs such as 3ds Max and Blender. And these were intensive programs. You would be working with a lot of polygons when creating these. You would import the files into gaming engines, and it would be really intensive on a computer. If you use Photoshop, photo editors, or anything such as ZBrush, for example, they're very intensive on the computer. Now, Photopea, on the contrary, is web-based. What makes it that Photopea isn't as intensive when running on the web?
Well, I think Photopea can be just as intensive as GIMP or Photoshop. It really depends on what you're doing. If you have like a 100 megapixel document with hundreds of layers, then it's gonna be slow, or it's gonna require a powerful machine, no matter if it's Photoshop or Photopea or GIMP. But if you do simple graphics, I think it should always work smoothly in every program, even on a slow computer. So I don't think it's like Photoshop. It should always be intense because it's not web. I don't think it works that way. I think it depends more on what kind of work you're doing.
People seem to be able to use that on a mobile device, and it's something I didn't expect because when you look at Photopea, the user interface is very overwhelming to say the least, at least from my
Actually,
perspective.
yeah. By the way, I can let me just mention about 30% of users are using it on mobile devices. When I first found out about it, I was quite surprised because I didn't expect it. And the thing is that it's absolutely the same Photopea. It's not like mobile version or anything. It's just squeezed into a smaller area, but it's pretty much the same program.
Now, have you tried it out on mobile? Because it seems it would be very difficult to click each of the buttons on the user interface, to click layers, to do select, to do paint. Did you find that complicated to do on a mobile device?
Yeah, I've been trying actually Photopea on my phone. Like once in a while, I try it on my phone just to check if everything like is as it's supposed to be. And actually, in the past, I made some changes, like to make it a little better, make it look a little better on a small screen. So I tried to make some buttons like possible to hide, that they can like I don't know how shrink.
Hmm.
Some panels can shrink, so and yeah, I would say that to some extent it's quite usable on a phone, but of course when you have a large screen and a mouse, it's much more comfortable.
So when you say there's 30% of users using the mobile device, do you think you're going to put more effort into creating features or to make it easier to use on that device? Or is it something you're just going to leave for a kind of niche group of users to use?
I think these are usually users who cannot afford a desktop computer or a laptop, so the only device they have is a phone or a tablet. And I I don't plan to make like simple version of Photopea or some reduced version. I think Photopea will still be a complex program which can do complex things, and there is not much I can do about making it simpler to work with on a phone. But of
Hmm.
course, I'm trying to listen to people if they sometimes somebody writes me that I can improve something to make it work better on a phone. I always try to do it, and I always keep it in mind that some people use it on a phone, and I care about it to some extent, but it's not like I'm trying to make like it's not my main priority, the phone users.
And I was watching your web conference video, and you showed off a couple of cool features, namely those being the liquify feature and the remove from image feature, which are both currently present on Photoshop. And while watching it, your comparison images seem to be much better than that of Photoshop. Are you planning on creating any new features to compete with Photoshop, or is it more or less likely going to be a one to one of the features that are currently available on that platform?
Well, I'm usually trying to listen to users because almost everything I do with Photopea is based on some user requests. So uh, there are many people asking for liquify feature or for some other feature, and these users are usually former users of Photoshop. So they usually ask me about to add a similar feature, for example, of Photoshop. So that's my main source of ideas, and I really don't know what exactly will I do in a future year or two, but I'm trying to focus on what people suggest me, and I'm trying to add it.
Would you say it is complex to add these features? And what I mean by that is, what is the process that goes about developing a feature such as liquify or remove from image, basically?
Yeah, it depends. Some features are some feature I think about it, and I immediately I know how to do it, but sometimes I have to think about it like a little more. And for example, this the feature which removes objects from images, I actually spent like 2 weeks just reading about this topic and reading scientific papers, and it was just me studying. I did not write a single line of code. I was just studying the existing existing solutions for it for 2 weeks. So yeah,
Wow.
I think that was quite you could say that was like advanced programming.
Hmm.
But yeah, and for example, liquify, it was I I could not find any resources on the internet about liquify, and I had no idea how to do it. Well, I have several ideas, and I spent like a week implementing my ideas, but they were bad ideas, and I deleted it all. But over time, I think it took me like 2 or 3 weeks to make proper liquify as you see it now.
What are some of the ideas that you came up with that didn't necessarily click or that weren't?
Well, in case of Liquify, you know that the user moves the brush and it should somehow smudge the image, right? But it can be many ways, like how exactly to do it. And my first idea was that I really don't want to get too technical here, but I just did the first idea which came to my mind, how I thought it could work, but then when I made it, I realized that it worked to some degree, but it was very slow and it did not look well, and I thought there should be a better solution. So I kept like thinking and trying, and eventually I got to the right method how to do it.
So it seems like there were a lot of different iterations of the
Yeah,
Liquify feature, and I'm assuming
yeah,
it's the same case for all of the other features that you created
yeah.
with Photopea, right?
Yeah, I you could say that I spent like 3 weeks working on Photopea, but the useful time was only 1 week because the first what I did the first 2 weeks it was garbage. I
So
threw it away.
I'm I'm thinking I'm going to get a lot of questions on this, but how do you stay motivated through developing all these features? You create the first program in 3 weeks, but then it takes 3 weeks alone just to do research on a single feature. What keeps you going to create more and more features?
Well, as you know, I work on Photopea for 6 years, and I would say the first 3 years was just I enjoyed it. It was like my hobby, and it was a challenge, you could say, and I was just curious if I can do that. So I really enjoyed it, and it's like playing a video game. You don't do it for some purpose. You do it because you enjoyed it. So that kept me motivated for the first 3 years.
Hmm.
And later, after 3 years, I had some user base, and I saw the number of users increasing, and I saw that some people depend on my tool to some degree, and I felt responsible to these people, and I I tried to fix bugs and to add new features because of these people, because I knew that it will be useful to somebody. So that's what kept me motivated then, and now eventually it became profitable for me. And yeah, the fact that it is profitable, and it's another kind of motivation, you could say.
You mentioned two things here. One, that you enjoyed programming, and two, that you felt you had a responsibility for the users of the program. Now, from my experience in programming, I took a JavaScript course back in college, and for me, it wasn't necessarily in my wheelhouse, meaning I didn't enjoy doing it as much as I wanted to do it. And when I did a lot of research on programming, people would always say it's tough to do, and to really feel engaged and enjoying what you're doing, you have to usually do projects to keep learning how to do JavaScript, how to do C sharp, C++, and any other programming language. Would you agree with that statement that it's more based on doing projects to keep engaged, or are people typically enjoying programming?
Well, in my case, I really enjoy when I finish some feature, for example. I really enjoy the product, the result, and maybe you could say I do not enjoy the work itself that much, but I enjoy that I was able to come up with something, to solve some problem, to find a solution. So when you find it, when you do what you wanted to do, you manage to do it. I think that's a nice feeling, and you are happy about the result, and you see other people are happy with it too. So it's useful to somebody. So I you could say that can be like motivation for
Hmm.
people.
I can see that. I mean, from my experience, again, going back to when I was creating mods for video
Yeah.
games, a lot of it came down to creating something that the user would enjoy. And when you're in a community where people are looking for solutions or looking for features or looking for a specific gameplay style, then it's motivating for you to go out and work towards developing that. It's not necessarily just the project that should motivate you, and it's not necessarily just the work that should motivate you, but the fact that you're solving a problem or that you're creating something that people want to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think actually when I studied, I gained some knowledge. It's like I learned about many things, and I became smarter maybe. But actually, you don't usually enjoy that. Oh yeah, I already understand some mathematics or something, you know.
Hmm.
But once you are able to apply it, and you create something nice with that, like when you have some result of your work, I think in my case that's much more pleasurable than just studying. So
Exactly.
maybe I did not enjoy studying that much, and I tried to find some activity which will give me the that feeling. So maybe that's why I started to work on photography.
Now, if we rewind the clock a bit, what did you study in college?
Well, yeah, I finished a bachelor and then master's degree, and in my bachelor it was computer science, and it was my area was called just programming, general programming, and then I go to the masters. And first, when I went to the masters, I started to study computer graphics. There was a special like how do you say it,
Program?
sub area at the master's degree at computer science. There was a sub area of computer graphics, so that's what I planned to study. But after half a year, I decided to change it, and I switched to artificial intelligence and theoretical computer science. So
Wow.
that's what I was studying and what I finished.
Hmm. So, what was it like studying artificial intelligence? Because that seems like a different area than where you're working in now.
Yeah, well, in computer science, everything like is interconnected to some degree, and many algorithms can be used for many unexpected problems in many unexpected cases. And I would say that during bachelor, I it was mostly mathematics, and I didn't really know what will I use it all for. But in artificial intelligence, you could say that everything is combined, and you can already apply some math or other things, and you also discover some interesting methods in artificial intelligence. And yeah, for example, when you saw that I made the feature when you can replace objects from the image, you could say that it's artificial intelligence to some degree, because the program has to come up with what's behind the person, you know.
Hmm. So, this may be a bit of a stretch, but are you familiar with what a deep fake is? A deep fake image or video?
Yeah, I think I've heard about it. It's like some program, and they they can take a picture of somebody, and they make them speak something.
Yep, it's similar to that. People will replace voices of people in
Yeah.
videos. They will replace people's faces
Hmm.
in videos and images. Is that kind of what you've worked on when you were doing your artificial intelligence program? Is that something that you see as a danger or to become even more evolved in the future when it comes to photo editing?
Well, the artificial intelligence is already like controversial topic, because many people are scared of it, and there are many opinions between many kinds of people, and in the society, it's I think it's always a bit controversial. But in my case, I think I studied like much more general stuff. And this deep fake that you mentioned, I would say that it's like the specific application of current research. And if I read the scientific paper, and then I think thanks to what I studied, I would be able to understand it and possibly to implement it myself or improve it somehow. But I did not I do not know how, I don't know how deepfake works like to 100%. That's not what I studied precisely, but it's more like my studying gave me better. My studying prepared me to be ready to do such things, but I did not study like every specific application deeply.
So you keep mentioning that you will take a lot of time to research a specific topic, look into research papers and other documentation for days, if not weeks, since you were taught just a general knowledge within university. Is this a common trend within the programming field where you'll kind of get a general knowledge in school, but it requires a lot of upkeep to do research into documentation, research papers, and other forms of material just to figure out how to do developments of specific features and different programs?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on what you do. It really depends. There are many kinds of programming jobs. There are many things that programmers do. Sometimes it's enough to use some library and connect it with your system and use it, but sometimes you have to invent something new. I would say that when you have some problem, in 99% of cases, somebody already solved it before you, and they published it on the internet for free, and you can use it in your case. But sometimes, for example, in my case, like nobody implemented Liquify, or Adobe did, but Photoshop is not open source, and there is no open source implementation of Liquify. So that's what I had to do myself. Yeah, so in my case, I had to do a lot of this research and coming up with new ideas, but in usually it doesn't have to be that way always.
So, what would you say are the key takeaways or things that you've learned from developing Photopea?
I don't think I learned too much from during developing Photopea. I think it's more like I applied what I learned at school, and for example, I know the some some industrial standards. I know, like, I understand the PDF format, or like OpenType font formats. I know these standards quite deeply, but because I had to make it, I had to use it in Photopea, and I had to learn all these specifications. But it's like a practical thing. It's not some complex scientific stuff.
People listening to this would be very interested to know what is the process to develop Photopea or any other program. Can you talk a bit about how you would guide someone into creating a similar platform?
Well, it depends on at what place in their lives they are. If somebody is young, like 10 years to 15 years, I would recommend spending a lot of time on math, learning math. I think that's really important for computer science career. So if you are like 10, 15, 18, I would really recommend to invest a lot of time in learning math. And if you want, once you already have some knowledge, you studied something, you can start. I would recommend studying computer science. I think when you study it like professionally at the university, you can. I in my case, I did study something on my own when I was at high school. I tried to learn many things, But I think when if I did not go to university, I would not be able to learn the same stuff by myself, like self-learning. So
Right.
if somebody has an opportunity to study computer science at the college, I would really recommend to do so. And yeah, if somebody is already like past the college, or then it's hard to say. Well, there can be many kinds of applications, many kinds of projects people can do. Like some things are easy, some things are hard. I would, well, photopea is quite complex thing, I would say. So it's it probably would not be uh, so easy to convince yourself to start working on it.
hmm
Yeah.
Now, I can see where you're coming from in the sense that it's good to have a background in mathematics and to go to university to get an education. When I took my JavaScript course and I tried learning Python, there was a lot of mathematics involved with it, which put me off from continuing programming because mathematics is not my wheelhouse. It's not something I enjoy doing. So, for me at least, it was not something I wanted to pursue. Now, when talking to other people, though, people would say that mathematics aren't necessarily required to learn programming. It's not one to one in the sense that you need math to be able to program.
Yeah, it really depends a lot on what exactly are you programming, what exactly are you making. For example, if you want to make like I really don't know what example should I mention, but you can really make some service which will be very useful to people, and billions of people will be using it, and you don't really have to know any mathematics for it. But
hmm
I just meant my case when making photopea, that if you really have to do every like graphic effects and stuff, if you really have to do everything yourself, then in that case it's really useful to know mathematics. But
I
it's
see.
not mandatory, like it's not necessary. As I said before, there are many kinds of programming that you can do, and sometimes you can, for example, use existing solutions and just combine them, and you don't really have to invent anything yourself.
When you say using existing solutions, what do you mean by that? Because when I hear that, it sounds as though one should go onto a platform like GitHub and just cut and paste code from other users. Is that
Yeah, if well, I think, yeah, if it's possible, everybody should copy paste. Well, not definitely not when you're learning. When you
right?
are learning at the school, it's really better to do everything yourself and to suffer and to suffer through the learning process, and then you can learn. Yeah, but if you have to do some practical, you're solving some practical problem, and there is already some solution which can help you, then definitely, and it's free to use, then definitely just copy paste it and use it. Of course, if I could copy paste photopea from somewhere, I would be happy, and I would not do everything myself. And actually I did. Many parts of photopea are not my own, like the JPEG format decoder. It's existing project from GitHub, so I just copied it, and it's not my code.
I was always curious about this, but what's the legality of using code from GitHub? And what I mean by that is there typically more than one way to create code for a specific feature?
Yeah, well, on GitHub, when you look in some projects, there should be always a file which contains the license, so you can read or look through that license. But many projects have like GPL license, MIT license, so each license defines what can you do with the code. But for example, with MIT license, you can do pretty much anything, and if you see somewhere MIT license, then it means you can copy it and use it.
So for those who don't know, what is an MIT license specifically?
Well, when you write some code or create any piece of data or anything, and then you say that you are publishing it under MIT license, uh, then actually it will be the best if I would recommend reading the MIT license. It's really short. It's like 5 sentences, but in general, it means that the author allows you to do with the code anything you want, and the author is not responsible if you get any damage from his code. So that's pretty much what MIT license is.
So it sounds like an open source, free to use.
Yeah, the open source is just a term for when the program code is published to people, but it's open source. It's not really a license.
I see. I wouldn't say I'm a technical expert when it comes to programming, so some of the terms that I might be throwing out wouldn't necessarily click with what a programmer might use, so to speak.
Well, somebody can yeah, so some company can publish their source code, but they so you can say that the program is open source, but they don't give you a license to use it. So you can see all the code on the GitHub or somewhere else, and you can see how everything works, but you are not allowed to use it because they didn't they just it's not licensed. So if it so that it can also happen that the some project is open source, but you cannot use it.
I see. So is that how Photopea operates, or is it operating in a different sense?
Well, at the moment, there are like Photopea is quite big at the moment, and there are different parts, different independent parts which are combined in Photopea in one program. And at the moment, some parts are open source, and I publish them on GitHub. But some other parts are not open source, and I don't publish my code for these parts.
Well, one thing that really stood out here was that you were contacted by companies such as Adobe, GIMP, and Google. Can you talk a bit more about that and what that kind of has led to since?
Well, in I think, but it was usually after I did Reddit AMA. Then many people learned about it. Many people who never heard about Photopea before, and there were many companies who wanted to get in touch with me. And as I said, I got in touch with Google or Adobe, and usually we had video calls, and we just talk about general things. They wanted to know more about me and about Photopea. So I told them like some information, and we just introduced each other, and we kept in touch. For example, with Google, I'm in touch with Google, Chrome developers, and sometimes we discuss some issues in Google Chrome through emails. Yeah, and also some companies were interested in investments, so they wanted to discuss possibility of investment. Yeah, so that's pretty much what we talked about.
Do you see the possibility of Photopea being acquired by another company, or do you plan on keeping the platform free to use as it is currently, with the exception of the fact that there is a subscription plan, so to speak, in which you remove the ads?
I do not plan to sell Photopea to another company like in advance. Like so it's not my main goal. I don't plan it. It's not like I'm already decided to sell Photopea at some point. It's not like that. It depends what offer comes to me, and I usually have to review each offer separately. So if somebody offers me billions of dollars tomorrow, then I will agree. But but in other cases, it really depends on specific case. So what are the conditions and what will happen after the acquisition? It's
Hmm.
yeah, it depends. I cannot just say like I want to sell it in the future 6 months, or it's not like that.
Do you see there being a situation in which Photopea is not free to use? And again, you do have your subscription plan, which does remove the ads from the platform, but is there a possibility that the platform as a whole will move away from being a free plan?
Oh, I hope it will. Well, as long as Photopea belongs to me, I really don't. I hope it will never happen. Because there are many programs out there which can do many things, and they cost. They have different costs. Some of them are free, and of course, in order to be useful, to be profitable, I have to be competitive. So I cannot offer the same thing as somebody else, but ask more money for it. And I think at the moment, when Photopea is free and it's quite advanced, you can do many things with it. I think that's really my advantage at the moment, and I would like it to be advantage in the future too. So yeah, I would say that I would like to keep Photopea free forever, hopefully.
At least for my experiences using Photopea editor when creating my branding for some of my logos, specifically the cover art image changes, I noticed that it was easy to use and it felt very similar to Photoshop. So even though there are competitors out there that do provide a variety of features compared to Photoshop, I personally think that Photopea is a very well done program,
Thank you.
and it offers a lot of features that are not only comparable to that of Photoshop, but the fact that it's built into the web browser is something that's very unique. You don't necessarily see a lot of programs built into the web browser when it comes to the creative fields.
Well, at the moment, actually, there are many. The web really improved in the past years, in the past decade, and at the moment, there are really almost no boundaries for companies to make their programs available through the web. So if some company want it, they can make their program web based in a couple of days, I think. So maybe in the future there will be much more programs available through the web.
Do you think that would be a challenge when it comes to system utilization for resources? So, for example, Photoshop, any media editor, any programming tool, any 3D modeling tool is fairly intensive uh, at a program level. Do you think it's fairly easy to translate that into a web friendly format and still be able to operate efficiently?
Well, it depends. Yeah, it depends on how the program looks at the moment, and what standards does it use. Like, for example, if some program uses DirectX, Direct 3D, which is the Microsoft standard, then of course there is no way to use Direct 3D in a web platform at the moment. So they would have to remake it to use WebGL or some similar standards. So it's in some cases it may not be easy to convert a program to a web-based program, but I think in general it's possible. And at the moment, the web version of a program doesn't necessarily have to be slower or less performant. And I think in the future, as browsers improve and technology improves overall, then I think it will be possible to make a web version of a program which is equally performant as a native version.
Wow. I mean, it's pretty impressive to think about.
Yeah, I would say that now we are like 80% of the way, but in the future we'll be 100%, and it will be easy.
So, can you clarify if something's built in the web browser, does that require a lot of resources from the system, or does that mean we will move to a point in which it won't be dependent on how much RAM your computer has or how fast your CPU is, or how powerful your GPU is?
Well, I think the state which will we have in the future, like the ideal state. Uh, of course, it's not like we are making our programs work in a browser. It's not like we have to adapt according to browsers, but it's also browsers who are adapting. Every browser is updated once a month, and the browsers are progressing, and the browsers are trying to be the best for us to run our tools as well as possible. So it's process both evolving the program, the web-based program, but also browsers are evolving. So you should consider both things. And I think like in a year or two, it will be quite possible to have a web-based program which is equally performant as a native. But
Hmm.
maybe I skipped through your question. Well,
No, I think you provided a general answer to that.
yeah.
I was thinking more along the lines, though, of is a web browser dependent on your system's components, or is it independent of that
Yeah,
to an
web
extent?
browsers uses the CPU and the RAM just like every other program.
Hmm.
But the fact is that the web app, which runs in a browser, it's like the browser is like a wrapping around the web app. So you make one web app for a web platform, but a browser is a layer between the web app and the CPU and the RAM and everything else. So the web browser doesn't really remove the requirements for the good computer. If you have a bad computer, then the web app will not be fast just because it's the fact that it's a web app.
Hmm. So a lot of it seems like it comes down to the
Yeah,
optimization of the browser.
you will not be able to make web work better than a native version of app.
Now, this kind of leads into where do you see Photopea going, and what are some other projects that you are currently working on?
Well, for the past 2 years, I've been working only on Photopea, and before that, I was making some web games. I don't know if I maybe mentioned it in that presentation on YouTube. I was making web games, but I don't do them anymore, as I think that the time that I invest in Photopea is more useful. So at the moment, I'm trying to read the requests from users, and I'm trying to implement them gradually. And I'm improving Photopea by small steps. And I don't think like I have a specific plan of what should happen in a 2 years or in 5 years.
Hmm.
So I never said it to anybody, but I bought a domain videop.com, and I'd like to make video editor sometimes.
So when you say a video editor, do you mean something similar to what's currently available with YouTube Editor, Windows Movie Maker, or even Adobe Premiere Pro?
Well, the thing is, I have absolutely no experience with video editing, so I think I'll have to teach myself some how other programs work and what kind of features are necessary to be in a video editor. So I will have
Hmm.
to introduce myself into video editing first, and then I will see how will my video editor look like.
It sounds as though you're following the similar steps that Adobe did. I know Adobe has FL Studio, they have Adobe Photoshop, they have, I think, Adobe Illustrator or even Adobe InDesign. But it seems as though you're creating a suite that's similar to their suite, but on the web browser, which is very competitive, if I were to say, because a lot of the community is very interested in having a web based, accessible editor for different streams. and you are creating something that kind of fulfills that need. So it's really cool to see.
Well, actually, I thought that video editing, it's like I think it will be similar to photo editing, but you just have to edit like many images which create a video. So that's I felt like it could be easy to do, but
I think it would be.
it could be like several more years of my life.
You never know. I mean, you've been pretty successful so far with Photopea, and there are always future requests, and you are clearly fulfilling a lot of the requests that people are looking for in terms of an online based editor for an assortment of different needs. So it's awesome to see that you're doing
Thank
this.
you.
So again, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Ivan.
Thank you
I
very much.
appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk about Photopea, talk about your history of developing it and what we could be seeing in the future. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Great. Well, I hope to have you on the show again sometime in the future.
Okay, perfect. I'll be looking forward to it.